Four more members.
Thank you, Chair. Obviously, we fully support this. I would say other small little towns like Hull and Bradford, there's not just 5 cities in the north, there's lots of major big cities in the north as well. So what I would say, it might not be a pinch point, but being at the end of the line, we have those reliability issues because, as I jokingly said to one of our operators early, we're always on time coming this way. Going back, I'll be late, and that's the reality today for lots of us. And I would also make the point for places like Hull, it's a particular issue because we don't have a tram system, we don't have an alternative. So if we're serious about modal shift, it is putting people in their cars if they can't rely on the reliability of the railways, and that is obviously failing our climate change requirements as well. Thank you.
Thanks, Chair. Just a similar point to Councillor Brown. Any proposed changes to services would need to be assessed by an agreed objective criteria and evidenced to which services should be considered. And that's the only contention that I've got in this. It's just what services, and again, similar to what I said earlier, what methodology are we using to determine the reduction in those services?
Can I fully endorse Andy's comments? If we are to seriously address the climate challenge that we face, if we're seriously provide a 21st century rail infrastructure, then we have to not just plan for the future, but deal with the now. And there's no doubt that the pinch points in Manchester and the bottleneck in Manchester is causing huge decline in reliability of services right the way across the north. And so it's really important that we solve that issue and solve it quickly. But also, I think, there's a point of reflection to the wider public that this is the first time we've been able to have a conversation about where strategically we think our priorities are, because we can see the benefit to us all. And I think that's a really important, valuable learning point from Transport for the North, that we're starting to think maturely and sensibly about investment over a period of time to deal with the challenges that we see across our entire network, rather than just taking parochial views. And I think that's why I'm very happy from a Newcastle point of view to advocate for Manchester, and I look forward at some point in the future to Andy returning the favour.
It's a point very well made, Nick, and thank you for making it. I mean, I recall over the last 2 years when we were grappling with the problems, sometimes intractable problems of the timetable debacle. Actually, the more we looked at it, in your particular case in the Greater Manchester and Merseyside congestion, it was this problem that we're debating today. But that was not quite as obvious at the very beginning of the learning curve. And as we've learnt that lesson, we can now apply the medicine, so to speak, mixing my metaphors, to get the right action at the right time. Now, still 3 other members wishing to contribute. Louise?
Yes, thank you, Chair. I'd just like to endorse everything that people have said so far, speaking on behalf of the Cheshire West and the Gateway to Wales, and certainly on behalf of our colleagues in Wales. The impact that Manchester has on delays to those services as well is well seen, and certainly coming over today from Liverpool, you can see that all the congestion is around Manchester, and maybe that's why, I mean, Nick's talked about our mature way that we're looking at things now, and I think the more you travel by train, the more you realise where those pinch points were. So, and talking of pinch points, I couldn't not mention Chester, which hopefully in the future will be one of the areas that is addressed. But certainly I'll be supporting all of this and endorsing the reduction in terms of the reduction in the service. We do need to look at that very carefully and make sure it's only a temporary measure.
Thank you, Chair. In Sheffield City Region, we support the recommendations, endorse them wholeheartedly. It's very important this problem is resolved. We just have a reservation, I guess, which is that we don't want this to be a sticking plaster solution to deal with the May 2018 problem. We need it to be a solution which deals with train enhancements that are already in the planning. So, for example, we have the Hope Valley Line upgrade, which is already going to have expenditure on it, and it will lead to a third fast train having to access Manchester. So if this solution does not deliver the capacity to deal with those enhancements, it means we need to come back to the matter again in the short term.
Yes, I think we've talked a great deal about how that corridor has just such a huge impact on all of us, and really welcome moving forward on this agenda. And I think from our perspective particularly, it's really important that we move forward on the work on the Calder Valley line. I think that absolutely feeds into it. Your reference to medicine, I've been really struggling with the use of palliative in the recommendations. Because actually there is a concern about this in terms of I just need to know whether actually reducing services will be adequate for doing the work that needs to be done, and might there be more intrusive work that needs to be done that we need to make sure that we're aware of at the earliest possible time, so that we make sure that alternative arrangements are in place, so we don't end up in a situation where, you know, suddenly at the last minute we're trying to plan emergency provision to deal with overruns or whatever. And let's please, can we just make sure we have a very realistic assessment of just how intrusive the additional work that we're coming in will be.
I'll start with that one. It's a really important point, well made. It is on our radar already, and we will make sure that's taken into account. Two other responses, if I may, just to reassure that there has been an officer working group looking at the service reductions. It does include officers from Cheshire and from Mersey Travel, as well as from other TFN members. So your officers are involved and taken into account on that. And on the final point, where a number of people have made references to other locations in the north of England, yes, it is the case that the RAWE needs to operate correctly in Manchester, so that the RAWE in the north of England can operate properly. But the converse is true as well. There are a number of other locations, Sheffield, Middlesbrough, Preston, and a number of other places. I won't try and, that's not meant to be a comprehensive name check, it's just to let you know we have identified those for further consideration, and there is a proposal in the paper that a report will come back to the Rail North Committee in April addressing those other locations. So this isn't just a case of just Manchester. The intention is to look comprehensively across the north as a whole to make sure that all the places are identified where it's necessary for investment to enable the north of England as a whole to work properly.
Chair, very quickly, I think Jim, you might have misunderstood the point. My point was that if there aren't to be service reductions, I think most people understand the need for that there needs to be agreed objective criteria and an evidence base on which services will be reduced.
Only to say, you know, I hear the reservations and support people in making those reservations, and recognise that this isn't the only piece of congested infrastructure, but it is a significant piece. But in that, I was just picking up the spirit of Nick's comments. I just want to thank everybody for their support today. And when Nick jumps into the trenches fighting for the duelling of the A1 north of Newcastle, I'll be there with him. So.
To look at the actions in paragraph 5.2, and I think we've had a good discussion. I think there's broad consensus, but can I have your approval for the package of proposals in Jim's paper in 5.2? And I should mention we have Richard George with us today, and I think we should put on record our thanks to Richard George for his work on this issue. Thank you. To item 4, and forgive me, item 4 is a legal item. As I've already mentioned, we only ask members of the public to leave us when there is information on the table which is commercially or otherwise sensitive and where we can't proceed if we're in a public session. We have 2 such items now where I'm seeking to use the powers of the Local Government Act 1972 to have a private session. But I can say to members of the public, please don't go far, because I think these 2 items will take us about 40 minutes, which is time enough for a cup of tea or coffee, and then we will reopen the meeting and the whole of the remainder of the meeting will be in public. So can I ask members whether they agree that the next 2 items be held in private for the reasons I have given? Thank you for your agreement. Could members of the public and the media leave us, and we'll invite you back as soon as we're able to do so. Thank you for your patience. Public session on webcam. Welcome back to any members. Thank you for your patience for stepping out during the private session. And we now move to a very important item, given the level of concern amongst members about rail performance. There was a very important meeting of the Rail Committee where these matters are dealt with in detail on a delegated basis. But I'm going to ask Dave Hogarth just to give us what happened at this morning's meeting on rail performance and a quick update on where we are. David.
Thank you, Chair. Very brief update because obviously many members were in the meeting this morning. I think I don't need to tell the board how bad performance has been throughout the autumn and particularly in the run up to Christmas. Whilst there's been some improvement since the new year, it's absolutely clear in the meeting that members on behalf of the public out there are absolutely fed up with the current level of performance, and I think very strong, robust challenge to the operators, so both Northern and TPE were represented at operator and owning group level, and I think they will be left in no doubt from that discussion of the degree of concern and the fact that TfN isn't going to sit back and accept this level of failure. I think particular concern from members that some of the previous discussions with the committee, the warnings to improve, to mitigate, to not stretch themselves, didn't appear to have been heeded. We did hear unreserved apologies from both operators for their part in the problems, and clearly members felt that wasn't sufficient. They want to see very clear, robust plans for improvement. The operators, for their part, did talk about the challenges of introducing brand new fleets of rolling stock across the north, and I think from my point of view just wanted to highlight that actually the key objective here, one of the key objectives after stabilising performance must be to get that rolling stock fully delivered, because there are substantial uplifts in capacity across the north that will resolve many of the crowding issues if they can deliver it in a robust way. TPE in particular were challenged for a plan to improve. They suggested March was the point where they would have restored the timetable and services back to an equivalent level of this time last year, which they cited as not great, but certainly better performance in the early part of last year, and further improvements in the summer when they had all the new rolling stock in. The committee didn't accept that as a plan, and have resolved to set a public target to TransPennine to improve, to scrutinise their plans, but then set publicly a target and hold them to account on that. And that was the key action from that part of the committee meeting. There was also a strong challenge on Northern, particularly around the cancellations, not only on Sundays, but what we saw unacceptable cancellations in the pre-Christmas period, and similarly calls to step up and sort that out, and they set out some of the actions that they are taking around that. I think the chair summed it up at the end of the meeting by saying it's 1 minute to midnight for the current operators. We won't be sitting back. We will be holding you to account, and if you don't deliver, then we will be calling for change, because we're not just going to sit back and accept this level of performance.
Thank you, David. Thank you for keeping the board, the committee and other stakeholders regularly briefed over the Christmas and New Year period on what was dispiriting news, but news as leaders we all needed to hear so we could make some decisions. Steve.
Chair, I won't rehearse what was said in the Rail Committee, but you will be cognisant that it's 12 months or more since I first started to ask what we need to do and what the mechanisms are within this board if performance continued to be deteriorating, what we would need to do to remove the franchise. And I don't know whether you've seen on the BBC, but when asked, the Secretary of State said, he was asked by the BBC, are you saying your intention as Transport Secretary is to remove the franchise from Northern? He said, that's right. in the autumn, I wrote to necessary parties in this with what's called a request for proposal. And, imagining that's us and Department for Transport. There are a couple of ways that can go. One is to strip the franchise. One is to have a short-term contract. But yes, exactly as you have said, I'm simply not prepared to have the service on Northern to carry on as it is, and I'm taking action. I just believe that this is the opportunity to find out what that action is. We need clarity on which of those options will be taken forward, because we need to do something, obviously, about the long-suffering travelling public across the north, and certainly on Northern and TPE. So could I see clarification from the Minister on actually what is being proposed that we're going to do and what the government are going to do to alleviate that chaos for passengers? And I wrote to the Secretary of State and I put it online and said if anybody supported this, then they could also co-sign this open letter. And as we do in the north, we always offer presents to ministers. So I've got some information for you to read on the train on the way back, hopefully not delayed. It's a petition in 5 weeks of around 4,500 people who've already signed this. And I'd like you to take this back. The signatures of that side are not blank. I'd like you to take this back and to consider when decisions are being made in London, the impact to people in our city region and across the Northern Corridor, because I genuinely believe that if this was happening in London, that there would have been debates in Parliament, there would have been questions to the Prime Minister, there would have been at least something happening in Westminster Hall to try and find a way around this. And just because we happen to be a little bit further away from the centre of power than the South is, then we shouldn't be treated as second-class citizens. And that's how many passengers believe the service that we've got is it's second-class.
Okay, thank you, Steve. Yes, Steve.
I've just remembered that when Andrew Jones came to his first TFN meeting, he came with a bag of gold. Do you remember that he put it on the table, the compensation package for us to spend on improvements to stations across the north? It's a little tip that we're quite amenable to accepting offers. Actually, I've been told that the Prime Minister has answered a question in Hearing Views today. The quote I've got, you can perhaps clarify, that he confirmed that we are developing contingency plans for a replacement for Northern Rail. That's what he said in the House of Commons today. But what the point I want to make is I think David's given a very very clear update from the meeting, and we don't need to go into all of those arguments again. It was very robust and very direct and very frank meeting, and I'm sure they left with absolutely no doubt that that we have to they have to really take action to have very definite timetable and commitments to improvements. From my perspective, actually, I think it's the first time that we've really put TPE under the same level of pressure as Northern, and you know, from the eastern side of the Pennines, it's been TPE, particularly over the Christmas period. You know, I know colleagues from North Yorkshire have had a horrendous time as well, and services virtually ceasing at parts of the day to Scarborough, for example, and you know, the real first-hand stories of real misery that people have been subjected to, you know, been really appalling. So I think, you know, all of us here around the table have been through months of coping with the poor performance across the north, and we really do need some direct answers and action as a matter of urgency. I think that was really the message from this morning, that we can't wait any longer. It's things have to happen now in a way that that we can move forward. But I have to say, the other very clear issue that came through this morning was that commitment to the operators from the department, from Network Rail, in terms of infrastructure improvements, are also very much a part of this picture. And, you know, if we're going to come forward with a real plan for how we can improve the North, and it really is that whole issue of us working much more as one industry, one service across the North, and everyone having a very clear understanding of what is happening. At the moment, we've created the environment has been created that, and we did get an element of it today. I don't know if others want to agree, where there was still an attempt to pass the buck to other parts of the system, and that can't be. We have to have someone who comes to us who absolutely takes full responsibility for everything that is happening.
Thanks, Chair. I mean, we're just bumping along the bottom with this, aren't we? This is just a repetition of conversations that we've had really over the last couple of years at least. I mean, we do need to understand that it does reputational damage to this body, because it's all very well as having conversations about things that are going to happen in the 20 years, 30 years, all that kind of stuff. But if you are a person who stands on Blackburn railway station watching trains get cancelled, if you're the person who loses your job, I mean, I know somebody now who has to get up at 3 o'clock in the morning to get to Accrington to catch a bus to get to Manchester because they'd been told that if they couldn't get there regularly for 6:30 or 7 o'clock, they were going to lose their job. And they've got an idiotic journey on now. If you're that person, all the stuff that we've been talking about previously is broadly just flim-flam. You know, you want to hear that. So we just cannot keep on having patience and listening to people say it'll get a little bit better, and then it gets worse again. It is a reputational damage to us.
Thank you.
Yeah, thank you. In the interest of balance, what I'm going to actually say was just a few weeks ago we had the joys of a new northern service to linking Hull, Bradford and Halifax, and obviously Leeds. So we actually have 2 trains an hour now from Hull to Leeds. So the first point I would make was if you don't have a train running, it can't be late. So at least congratulations to Northern for that. What I will say, I think in some ways the focus is always on Northern. I think it's a plague on both your houses, because in many ways, from the whole perspective, the Transpennine performance is just as bad. And I have to say, and I do follow on from Phil's point of view, in terms of Phil's point of view, it's if we're going to have this body, people are going to ask what levers do we have to, in a sense, hold people to account. Because what people want is reliable trains that run on time. And I'm going to sound like a sort of broken record, but it is about, from places like Hull, it's about modal shift, because we don't have those M62 delays that you have elsewhere across the Pennine. So there is actually an alternative, which is often quicker and more reliable in the car, which is what we don't want. We want people to be getting on the trains. So in a sense, it's about giving us meaningful mechanisms to hold those train operation companies to account, or take it off them. So I do welcome the government's view that they're actually going to look at this and do something about this, hopefully. But we want to hear what that is, and we want, in a sense, that to be sooner rather than later, because we have been sort of almost Groundhog Day in here sometimes, and we have the same conversation again and again and again. Thank you.
Thank you.
Yes, thank you. Just to really support what Judith said, I think in the meeting this morning, they seem to be blaming everybody else but themselves, and they think that they can, if they offer apologies, that puts things right, and I think that's not acceptable. I know that Ben Houcham had published an open letter about his concerns. Between 20 and 25% of the services in Tees Valley have been cancelled in the previous couple of weeks, so it is totally unacceptable. And I hope that they went away with a very strong feeling of how we felt, and I think that we need support from this board.
Strongly agree with what Heather said. Chair, I tried to travel from the northwest to the northeast on the 28th of December, and to say it was shambolic is an understatement, and it was actually probably very similar to May 2018 It's just that people weren't probably travelling in the same numbers and the attention wasn't on it in the same way. It was absolutely appalling. I would go as far as to say it almost collapsed, the rail service in that period. But then it was appalling going into Christmas. So we'd agreed 90 planned cancellations for Northern. Going right through the Christmas market period in Manchester, we were having 100 additional cancellations on top of that. I mean, that is a 6-day rail service. This company were contracted to provide a 7-day rail service. And that is the bottom line. We will not put up with a 6-day rail service any longer. We won't. I'm pleased the Minister's here today. Disappointed, like Steve, that the Secretary of State's not here. We understand the way these things work sometimes. But, you know, and while we also appreciate the promises of infrastructure and the government's focus on infrastructure, this is a prior issue, I think, as Phil is saying. This is a here and now. You won't get permission to be heard on the infrastructure until you've gripped and dealt with this now, because people's lives are ruined right now. Just a couple of observations from my point of view. I mean, it's absolutely right what was said. Sickness was blamed this morning. I'm afraid the NHS doesn't blame. It's under even greater pressure, but it carries on going. So I'm sorry, but that isn't acceptable. But there was one thing said, I'll just talk about Northern for a moment. One thing was said by Northern, which I think this board needs to hear, when challenged about why they feel they've got a right to have an ongoing role in the North, and whether or not they'd done everything that they should. They said no other operator would have taken any better decisions than us, is what was said, a quote to that effect. Well, I just think I just need, in this forum, to challenge that statement, because I believe it was with your support, Chair, and the intervention of myself, Steve, and others around this table, Judith and others, that we helped negotiate. They would not have negotiated a solution with the RMT over guards on trains were it not for that intervention. And then secondly, this time last year, they weren't even addressing the Sundays issue. And it was, again, the Rail North Committee that required them to start addressing the Sundays issue. Now, they haven't solved it a year later, but it's just not correct for them to say that they've made every decision right and no one else would have done anything else. And I just think that's important to say in this forum. With regard to TransPennine, I think, as Judith said, they've kind of cowered behind the Northern situation in some ways and hoped that the finger would never point in their direction. Well, now it very clearly is. And it was encouraging that the committee agreed together to set a public deadline. What I think, picking up what David said, Chair, I think we now need to consider a construct for that public deadline. Yes, an earlier date in the year, March or something, by which services have to get back up to a passable standard. And then maybe a second date in the year by which they then have to get up to the required standard. And I think we should do that quickly, because I can't remember whether it was Phil or Darren said, in the end it goes to the purpose of us. You know, we cannot come together like this and not, we've been hearing it's deja vu, isn't it? And it has to be broken and it has to be gripped. And I think with TPE, that requires, I think, a public deadline by which we will hold them accountable. And I think we're looking to David and officers to help now construct a public deadline for TPE that will do just that. So I'll finish on this point, Chair. 2018 and 2019 were 2 terrible years on our railways with 2 failing franchises. We cannot let 2020 drift into a similar situation. It has to be gripped. And we say that to the government. We hope the Secretary of State's coming here tomorrow to address these issues, because we believe he does need to address them with that level of urgency. There is a timetable issue that we need to discuss later around how we amend the timetable to get more stability in the, let's say, the more medium term. But echoing what everybody said around the table, this isn't days or weeks or months, as was said today. This, I think, has to be gripped right now. The public have had enough.
Yeah. Thanks, Chair. I mean, I don't want to repeat a lot of the stuff that we went through this morning, but I do need to emphasise the adverse impact on the North East in particular of the TransPennine services. This is not something new. It's not something that's just started. we've had sort of years of turmoil since they took on the franchise of trains being turned around in York and not making it up into the northeast. It's cut off rural communities north of Newcastle as well as into the Tees Valley. And here we are, when we got assurances from TPE that the additional services they were going to provide wouldn't be to the detriment of the bread and butter stuff that we knew they hadn't quite got right anyway. And what happened over Christmas was nothing short of an absolute farce for rail users in the northeast. 30% of the timetable ripped up overnight, and only half of the trains coming into the northeast were actually anywhere near the time they were meant to arrive. So, when we challenged them this morning, I wasn't convinced that they had a clear plan as to how they were going to put that right. We've had empty promises from them before, so I welcome the proposal from the committee to try and set some clear deadlines to improve the service. But I do look forward to, in the future, working with the DFT to hold TPE to account, because I don't think we can be in a position 6 months into the new year where we're happy accepting a second-class rail service, and I don't think we should be celebrating failure in the rail industry. We need to be aiming to get TPE providing services at an acceptable level, so at least there's a decent chance when people turn up at the rail station that they're going to get to the family, they're going to get to work. So, I did question TPE this morning on their policy of awarding bonuses and pay rises to the senior staff. In any other industry, those staff would have been cleared out long before now, because there's a historic failure of mismanagement within TPE, and they really need to take a long and hard look at themselves as a company. I think, just to briefly end with a comment about Northern, what's become clear to me with Northern is that they took a gamble on the franchise that they bid for. They took a gamble on things that were outside of their control, and they took a financial gamble on the franchise as well. And that gamble hasn't paid off, and that gamble has now had such a detrimental impact on millions of people's lives across the north and the reputation of the whole rail industry that some people are going to take years to have that confidence installed in them. So I think we've got a lot of work ahead, but I think we need to get to a position where we start to see some light at the end of the tunnel, Chair.
Yeah, thank you, Chair. We've been here before. It's deja vu, as Andy says, and the reputation of this board and the Rail North Committee really depend on these franchises. All I would say to the Minister is that we need some continuity within government with ministers as well. We've had a number who have sat around this table with us and a number who have left for different reasons. It was interesting today to see that both of the sponsors of the two talks were sitting alongside of them today. That's the first time, really, that we've seen those people actually coming to the table. And we've also heard again today from Richard and also from Jim about the dreadful state of the infrastructure. And I keep coming back to this infrastructure. It's not something we can get around. It's not something, I know what people are saying. There are a number of reasons that the talks are trying to give for the bad performance. Some of it is excuses, so there's no doubt about that, but there are some reasons in there as well. And government need to be aware that there are serious situations out there on our network that have to be resolved, and they're long-standing issues for us. Thank you, Chair.
Thank you, Chair. I just want to reiterate the concern that others have expressed. I think there is a consensus that our rail services have operated at a completely unacceptable level for far too long. As we've heard, the human impact that has on people in the north of England on a daily basis is completely devastating, and it is completely unacceptable. I think there's a shorter term issue in terms of getting the clarity from government that we need in terms of the franchise. It would be incredibly useful to have that as soon as possible. But then there is a longer term strategic issue around a commitment to invest a greater proportion of national wealth in transport infrastructure in the north of England. I think there was a very useful discussion about that in the House yesterday during Treasury questions, and I hope the government, having given a commitment to seek to invest more in our infrastructure and to invest more in the north of England, take the opportunity at the forthcoming budget to put in place real measures that will allow us to upgrade the transport infrastructure, because I think all of us understand the urgent need to do that.
Thank you for listening to all that. The problem is we've been here
I should thank Brian. Barry, I should thank Keith for calling for the Rail Minister to stay in role. That's a first, actually. And I hope you don't live to regret it. Nor me, in fact. So let's go through. So Steve outlined the process that has been going through for Northern. When a train operating company starts to have issues, there is a legal process to connect to the franchise agreement, which is called the request for proposals that the Secretary of State outlined. And those proposals come from the management of the train operating company, because the government has an opportunity to award a short-term management contract with them, or from what we call the operator of last resort, which essentially is when the department, or an arm's length body of the department, the ONR, take on the running of that. There is a very detailed legal process that then goes on with figures going back and forth and things being proven and disproven to do with finances, performance, and the whole lot. And at the end of it, the government will make a decision. How long will that process take? Not much longer is the answer. There are probably a few weeks left in that process, less than more. I suggest it would be sooner rather than later. So we're coming right to the end of that process. Can I just say, though, that whatever the government then chooses to do, there will not be a massive uplift in the change overnight in Northern's services. You know, we've got to be realistic about what is actually going on within that particular train operating company. But I do believe, so what the Prime Minister said today was about developing contingency plans for a replacement for Northern Rail, absolutely right. That is exactly what both those arms, the short-term management contract Aruba and the operator for last resort, are doing, and presenting to us what they would do differently were we to take the franchise away or go down either of those particular routes. So people with expertise come to us with their ideas and proposals as to what is best that they believe for that franchise. We then make a decision. It takes a few weeks to stand up that decision, probably at the end of a what they call a period in the rail industry. But I think you can expect to see quite significant change very soon, and it is worth talking and listening to the Secretary of State tomorrow when he comes up here on this matter. Darren made actually a really key point in his intervention, because the interdependence of all the different factors on our railways is what's gone wrong actually across the whole of the system here. Northern will rightly point to Network Rail not delivering on some of infrastructure improvements back when it had its big timetable problem back in 2018. There's a whole host, everyone can point fingers at everyone else. One of the big delays that happened just before Christmas was a TPE train failing to leave the depot properly, not too far away from here, and trapping lots of Northern trains behind it. And that had massive ramifications for a day's worth of journeys. So, like you, and you would expect me to say this, but we are absolutely near the end game of coming to a decision when it comes to the legal bits of everything being lined up for us when it comes to Northern. Like you, the Secretary of State has asked TransPennine Express and it's the companies that own it to come in and probably go through a similar exercise that you've done today with them to get not just explanations as to what's gone wrong, but what they're doing to recover it, asking for... I heard your deadlines, Andy, for them to improve. I'd imagine ours would be more ambitious than this, because government is sick and tired of bad performance on these operators as well. It's an unacceptable level. Yes, you'd expect me to say that, but we are doing what we need to do legally, so we do not get sued to high heaven afterwards, to make sure that and make sure we deliver the right decision by the passengers and the people that work on these railways going forward. So thank you for the petition, Steve. I know I know from your previous record in Parliament you could have got hundreds of thousands more to that. I do understand, completely understand the level of feeling behind what has been going on in Northern. But it's whatever the change is. This will be a long-term-ish project to turn around this franchise. There's lots that needs to be done, that needs to be tackled. Many of you mentioned, it's turned into a 6-day working franchise. There are all sorts of issues that we need to come together on and work together on to solve around that. And I think probably working together on some of those, I'll be coming and knocking on your doors to try and help on in the not too distant future. But I promise you, I've heard everything that's said. Secretary of State is up here tomorrow to talk more about these particular issues. I will take back the petition. I'll come back to you with some of the things that I've said, but we are as frustrated as the people around this table and want to deliver much better services for the people that you all represent around this table too.
If we could do it very briefly, because we're well behind schedule now.
It will be very brief, Chair. It's just to thank the Minister for his candour in regard to what he'll do. Nobody around this table or outside believes that simply by taking the franchise off, it's a magic bullet in itself and it's going to put everything right. But what we would appreciate, I think, is a dialogue with you or your officials before announcements are made, so at least we're aware of the direction that the government are going to take the rail system that affects everybody sitting around here.
In the long term, we need a lot of new infrastructure in the north of England. But if we cannot deliver the trains this week, we don't have the sense of permission to deliver the long-term improvements which need to go with them. And I think at that point, clearly, we will work on this through Barry and the team daily between meetings. But at this point, we should move to the next item on the agenda. So I'm now moving to the financial items that are very properly matters of consideration for this board. We have the year-to-date report from Ian.
Thank you, Chair. This report summarises the year-to-date financial position of TfN up to the end of November 2019. It sets out the latest reforecast through to the end of the year and provides a compliance update on the operation of TfN's Treasury Management Strategy. A few brief highlights. Expenditure to the end of November was 26 million, an underspend of 16 against the original budget and circa 9.6 against the Revision 1 reforecast previously reported. Whilst there are some underspends across all of TfN's expenditure areas, the report sets out that they're principally due to issues in relation to its major programmes, but particularly with the IST programme, as has previously been reported. The full year Revision 2 forecast has returned a revised budget of around £52 million. That's a reduction of 24.8 million from the opening budget and roughly 4.9 from Revision 1. Again, the principal movement in the revision is in the IST programme. Although this was in part reflected in the Revision 1 forecast, the reduction in expenditure on the programme of over 22 million is circa 90% of the total reduction that we've got across all budget areas. Finally, I can report compliance with TfN's Treasury Management Strategy during the first 6 months of the financial year. Probably best, rather than me talking, to take questions from people.
Thank you, Ian, for the speed with which you've done that. Yes, please. Matthew.
Thanks, Ian, for the report. The report reflects the restatement of after the first quarter of the year, and I note that there is a massive underspend in terms of the IST project, so I'm allowing for that. But even taking the IST project out, We were forecast to spend 18.2 million on various projects, and we've actually only spent 14.6. So that's a 20% underspend. Now, my understanding of this organisation is not actually here to save money, it's to spend the money to get us to the place we want to be. So if we've underspent by 20%, that suggests to me as a KPI that we're not going to achieve the targets that we want to in a timely manner. So my questions are, what is the plan to catch up on project timescales with such a big underspend? And secondly, what will the cost reduction be if we have a much simpler IST project as we've just voted through?
I'll take other questions and then come back to Ian.
Just a bit of nervousness on the last point that the colleague said, because I thought that underspend on the IST was going to go into fair support. We talked about, wasn't that the argument? That some of that would be used.
Subject to agreement with government.
Yeah, sure. I think if you look at both the year-to-date and the reforecast, I think in both cases the bulk of that, as Matthew has suggested, is in relation to the IST programme. And I think if you look at the revision 2, it accounts for over 22 million of the 24.8 that is included. Now, that said, there are clearly underspends in other areas that need to be addressed. I think I would say that I'm not quite sure I think I understand the underlying point, but I would say we are here to save money where possible. I think if we can deliver work and outputs for less money than is in the budget, then that is a positive thing. And I think certainly some of the underspend within the MPR programme, for instance, is in relation to Sequence 4 work being done at less cost than was originally budgeted. So I think there are savings, and I think we should seek to find savings wherever we can when we're looking at delivering the work that we're doing. I think there is an underlying issue that has been identified within Transport for North around some of the more complex modelling work that we're doing. Now, we have got an issue across all of our work that quite a lot of it it's innovative, it's complicated, and it also relies on external parties for us to move it forward. So we are budgeting and then trying to deliver in quite a complicated environment. I think those issues really come to the fore when looking at some of the modelling work that we're doing, and that is at the cutting edge, as I understand it, of what is going on within the market, but also it has consequences internally in other programmes. So some of the underspends, quite a lot of the underspend within MPR is to do with modelling outputs and some of the delays on the roads projects. So some of the sizable chunk of the underspend within major roads is related to development of quantitative models for use within the SDC programme. We have recognised this internally. We are seeking to address this, and work is underway, particularly within the MPR programme, to improve the current model for designing and controlling the delivery of modelling work. I think in terms of catching up, there is obviously 3 months now to go within the budget year. The latest, there will be another revision done and presented to the board, probably presented to the board as an outturn forecast actually rather than a revision come March. But we are pressing in terms of deliverables within TFN to meet the objectives that were set in the last business plan. In terms of IST, just to reiterate the point that was made, the intention is to make sure that the funding that was available previously is rolled into the next spending review period, and those discussions have been had with the Department and with Treasury, and we don't anticipate any problems arising from that at this point.
Thank you. Barry?
So just to pick up on the point that Darren was making, so within the IST paper under option C, when we're talking about fares reform, the suggestion there was in an area where many operators are coming together to accept a contactless capped fare system, one of the issues often to overcome is the perceived revenue risk that might be a short-term risk while that new fare structure settles in. and before any sort of passenger growth happens. So actually, what the IST paper was suggesting isn't about fares reduction on, say, rail, for instance. It's actually about underpinning or providing some sort of guarantee to help that transition period where operators are coming together to put in place a different fares structure to allow that contactless system to be introduced. So it's a transitional sort of support mechanism that would be put in place. It's not there as a long-term fares reduction tool. That would require funding of a different order altogether.
Okay, Matthew, does that answer for me and give you what you need?
Thank you, Chairman. Yes and no. I think a number of the papers that we've been asked to read prior to this meeting demonstrate that there is progress being made and things are up to date. But actually, the finance report, and this isn't a reflection on the finance team, but it's the only thing that gives us quantitative information. It suggests we're 20% behind. So I think there's a bit of smoke and mirrors going on, and I think perhaps the individual reports ought to identify on a more quantitative basis how up to date we actually are, where we're trying to get to.
So if I may, I think we do need to move on here, but I think there's two actions we could take. Offline, I think it would be useful for Ian just to continue his conversation with you, Matthew, because I think a particular variance, if you leave IST on one side, is the NPR programme. And I think the NPR programme has been on schedule, but has just managed to do it at a lower unit cost. So we would see that as a positive, but you need to be convinced of that offline. Otherwise, your point clearly is well made. And secondly, I think Matthew makes a very good point that we might well look at, Barry, of including more quantitative information in some of the other papers so that we can just monitor performance. But that's something you could take away.
So we had a very busy agenda today, but with the agenda items, we did circulate a monthly operating report, which we will be circulating on a monthly basis. This is a consolidated report that was previously given to Executive Board. We're issuing it to all board members, and there is more detail in there, Matthew, around some of those challenges. But we will be taking this at board meetings on the agenda as an operational update that sits alongside the finance report.
Point well. Can I now move then to paragraph 5, where we're asked to approve the second revision of the budget? Thank you very much, colleagues. Again, and we'll look at the risk report.
As members will be aware, the Constitution requires that we adopt and implement a risk management strategy. The risk reporting that is presented to the TFN board for this risk reporting is presented to TFN board for information and discussion, and it sits at the apex of Transport for the North's risk management process. It's intended to provide members with information regarding key corporate level risks to TFN and the delivery of its programme of work and the associated mitigations that have been put in place. Risk management is a standing item on the agenda of the TFN Audit and Governance Committee and was most recently considered at the meeting held on the 22nd of November. The views in the Audit and Governance Committee, both in terms of the substance and presentation of TFN risk reporting, have been reflected. We are currently working on a revised report format with the intention of making it more accessible to the reader. In addition, an internal audit review of the risk management strategy in 2019 gave a high level of assurance with regard to its approach and operation. We've also updated the risk management strategy to reflect operational experience since it was adopted in April 2018. Moving on briefly to the summary of risks that are set out in Table 1, members will see that the risk reporting is reflective of the challenges faced across a number of TFN programmes, in particular with regard to the ICT and strategic rail, where previously reported risks have now manifested as issues. It's also notable that the post-mitigation levels of risk are lower in those areas where TFN has substantial operational control over the delivery of its objectives and are higher when it's reliant on external parties. Again, given limited time for this item, I'm happy to take questions.
Darren?
I just don't want to sound like a pedant because it's the second year running I've raised something on the risk. Obviously, coming from a local authority that printed in black and white, my colleague has alerted me to the colour version. Can we not use black if it's a colour that isn't represented in the risk matrix? Because we've got a matrix telling us of all the colours, and then we use a black, which is not on the... So I think it has to stay red, doesn't it? have to put a black on the...
I think we
page
need to
two.
put, we'll put a black on. There's a black in the risk management strategy from memory, so I'll make sure that's included.
Thank you.
Just a suggestion, do we need to have something in here about climate emergency? Going back to what Judith mentioned before about all our individual obligations and the risk of not meeting the deadlines and the dates within that. Does that need to be incorporated in here somehow?
I think that's a very compelling point, Ian. It is a motif of the board now, and it should be fully reflected in the risk register and clearly a major risk. Let's pick that up, Louise. Well, I'll take silence for assent then, if I may. I thought this was a pretty good piece of management information. I think you have, with that single addition from Louise, identified the right risks, and clearly we have them at the front of our mind, and it is an important responsibility of this board, notwithstanding the fact that clearly the audit committee look at this, as with any board governance structure, in more detail. So thank you, Ian. On that basis, can we note... I now want to move to fares. David, you know what I'm going to say next. Important as this issue is, we are now a little behind. People have a lot of travel to do to get home.
I'll be as brief as I can, Chair, of course. I think it's hardly surprising, given where we are with performance, that in 2018, only about a third of Northern and Transpennine commuters thought they were satisfied with the value for money. Clearly, the absolute level of fares is part of that, but the general complexity and difficulty of getting the right fare is a big part of that as well. So our long-term rail strategy includes a piece on fares, and this is one of a series of delivery plans we're bringing forward on the long-term rail strategy, and this sets out a position and vision on fares, which is essentially convenient, seamless travel across the network, which provides passengers with the confidence that they will be charged the best value fare. And it entirely complements the IST vision, the account-based travel, and it puts in place some of the mechanisms across the rail network that would support that. But it goes further in terms of the aspiration of consistent daily products in all areas, simplification of fares routing, consistent peak time restrictions, flexi seasons, which Northern are actually working on for us to introduce at the moment, and resolution of some of the cross-boundary changes that you get that make travelling from different parts of the north really difficult. So this is all really important in terms of the connectivity aspirations that we have in the strategy. What we will do, if you endorse this, is develop some of those individual proposals on a case-by-case basis through the business case process, look for opportunities with our current and future rail operators, and I think particularly the Minister mentioned earlier on the importance of fares as part of the Williams Review. We see some big opportunities coming out of the Williams Review, but endorsing the strategy today would give us a really good strategy and starting point for that.
Yeah, I said it in the sort of the closed part of the meeting, but obviously for those of us outside the former PT areas, obviously we don't always have that modal choice, and whilst it's important around strategic long journeys city to city, if we're serious about modal shift for, say, some of the smaller commuter towns into Hull, say from the East Riding, we've got some of the per mile highest cost rail fares in the country. So I would hope that we can look towards some pilots outside of the big metropolitan areas around looking at the pricing point, because it isn't just about reliability. It's about reliability first and foremost, but it's also about pricing in terms of making it as an alternative to encourage and support modal shift. Thank you.
Thank you. Well, that's clearly a priority for the board, Darren. We'll pick that up. Chris.
Thank you, Chair. Very briefly to say, I think the complexity of the fares has acted as a disincentive to travel, and I'm particularly pleased along here the idea that we might have pilots, which are met with enthusiasm, and I think anything that simplifies the current incredibly complex system, which even I only vaguely understand, has got to be encouraged, Chairman. And pilots, to me, sounds quite an interesting project.
Briefly, Chair, I know this is about fares reform and integration with IST, but 55 million fares, nearly all went up in January. And I think that any fares now, going forward, should be pegged with performance and not just an incremental RPI increase.
Thank you. This paper reflected many of the discussions we've had around this table, and therefore I think the executive should be commended for pulling together a piece of work that goes with the grain of what we're trying to achieve. But clearly it's a promissory note, isn't it, David, of what you're going to do next. So on that basis, are we happy to endorse this report? Yep. Thank you very much indeed. I'll now move to item 12, which is bringing back the constitution issue that we discussed at the last meeting, and I'll ask Julie, the monitoring officer, to introduce it.
Yes, thank you, Chairman. I can be very brief indeed. Members will recall that at the board meeting on the 12th of September, it was resolved that a further report be brought to this meeting addressing the issues involved in a broader context. In the meantime, Scrutiny Committee considered the matters, and on the 18th of December, it provided its views. So the report before board today therefore considers a number of things. First of all, it reiterates the background. It provides a broader consideration of the points which were considered on the 12th of September. It explains the provisions of the Constitution as to the majority that would be required for certain decisions to be made. It includes the views of the Scrutiny Committee, and at your request, Chairman, your views on the matter are also included. So the decisions which board is asked to consider today are those which are set out at paragraph 9 of the report, and the decisions are obviously for board as a whole to make. Thank you, Chairman.
Let me throw it open for comment or questions. Peter.
Thank you, Chair. Whilst Rail North Committee was meeting, the LEPs also met at 11 a.m. this morning. One of the items we discussed was this item on the agenda. We had some reservations about expanding the board, partnership board, further because it becomes unmanageable. I think those sort of points were raised during the debate at the last meeting. However, we're prepared to accept this, but we would like the partnership board to continue to meet in private so that we can have a detailed, dynamic exchange of views on all the relevant issues of the day. So that is the view of the LEP, Chair.
Thank you, Peter, and thank you for the LEPs having a side meeting in order to formulate a collective view. Don.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. And whilst I acknowledge the fact that the proposal that was originally brought to us in September has changed, Steve wanted 3 union membership of the full board, and now it's a partnership board we're talking about, and I notice also that you've attempted to get 3 other representatives into it. The first problem I have, frankly, is that the partnership board and this board is already very large, and it gets even larger, unwieldy, and I don't believe that increasing the size of either the partnership board or this board increases either its effectiveness or its efficiency. As I said when we spoke about this in September, I am here to represent the users of transport, rail and road and sustainable transport of North Yorkshire. And I want to do everything in my power to improve their options and to live up to the vision that we have for transport to the north. I don't believe unions are in that same place. We've heard this morning at the Rail North meeting that part of the issues that they cited as reasons for failing to deliver an acceptable service in December was their difficulties with trades unions. Intransigence, as they called it, inflexibility, unwillingness to introduce flexible working, Sunday working, to work with the new rolling stock that's coming in. I can understand that, of course, the unions are there to represent the interests of their members. But as I said at the beginning, we're here to represent the interests of the travelling public of the north of England. And I think there is a conflict there, and therefore, even with these revised compromise recommendations, I will still continue to vote against.
Thank you, Chair. So there is clearly an issue about the size of any board, but there's also an issue about the diversity of any board. Is a board representing all voices in the debate, all people affected by some of the issues that we've been discussing today. Is this board properly representing the concerns of many younger people around the environment, which probably, if we're honest with ourselves, we haven't properly over the last couple of years. So it isn't just about size is a consideration, but I would say a higher priority is what we would call in Greater Manchester co-production, where you make policy with people, all people, able to shape the policies. And that's what devolution, when we're part of the devolution movement, by the way, you know, that is the opportunity it provides to involve more people in the debate rather than things just being done in Whitehall. And if we're honest with ourselves, we look around today, we are not fully reflecting the diversity of the North. And to go to the comments about trade unions, I mean, I think they are unhelpful comments that we've just heard, to be honest, because it perpetuates an adversarial approach. Whereas if the railways are to work, they're going to have to work on a social partnership approach, where employers work with organisations representing the workforce in a more collaborative way to get solutions rather than in this adversarial way that we have in the moment. When I was Secretary of State for Health, we had difficult workforce issues within the NHS, but it led to the creation of a social partnership forum whereby those things were debated properly early on, and it led to better industrial relations. So I very strongly, I understand the change that's been made, but I think this is a good change, both in terms of getting the railways running better, because voices linked into the running of the railways have a way in which to bring issues and resolve issues, but particularly as well in relation to the greater prominence of environmental concerns that Louise raised earlier. Disability groups, I mean, goodness me, have we given enough time to the question of access to our transport infrastructure? Half of the train stations in Greater Manchester do not have wheelchair access. You know, I'm not sure we are talking enough about that. That is, you know, we're talking about services for people. Some people can't even get into the place to get on the train. And I don't think we're giving justice to those issues either. And I think for all those reasons, we should endorse this modest proposal to bring more voices into the room, more diversity into this board, and create a culture for a better social partnership between employers and the workforce within the railway industry.
Yes, I'll probably echo everything that Andy's had to say there. But I'm looking at the process on B on here. I think one shouldn't hold up the other. So if we are going to actually implement a new membership, we shouldn't have to wait till everyone's in place, and we should say when people are ready to take the places and the process, that should start. I think unions are stakeholders in the old industry, and they still have a voice. At present, they haven't a voice in this body. So I think that's not recognised, and it's not being heard anywhere. And as has been said, involving unions at an early stage can solve some of the problems which we standoffs that we've actually had to face in the industry as it's caused some of the problems, or been part of the problem, we're told. But this body got involved and managed to find some solutions to that. Had the unions been a part of this body, then solutions could have been found a lot sooner, and the actual dragging on this issue with the employees actually dragging it out even further than needed to be could have been solved a lot sooner. So I think involvement in people, the unions, TUC would be a positive move. Involving other people, particularly young people. I think they sat in the Parliament in November where the Parliament was full of young people, debating issues, what matter to young people, and I think environment was one of the top issues that came out there. Their voice isn't represented here either. So that's another voice there, and obviously I think all endorse what's coming forward here, and looking at B would be a solution forward, I think, going forward, more inclusive, including getting more voices heard and get a more diverse look at issues. Thank you.
Thanks, Chairman.
clearly we do need to take into account the views of younger residents, older residents indeed, that are commuting up and down the north of England, and in particular people with disabilities. And as Andy rightly said, that can be a barrier to people actually using public transport at all. But I don't think necessarily increasing the size of the partnership board is the way of doing that. We should be taking into account these issues. We should be taking into account the environment in any case. And if we're not, the representatives sat around this table, we are not collectively doing our job. So I don't think we necessarily need to increase the size. The partnership board is very large already. And it comes a point when a board can become too large and too unwieldy and does nothing in terms of effectiveness or efficiency of running that board and being able to make recommendations to the full board and then in turn for us to make decisions. So on that basis, Chairman, I regret that I will not be supporting the recommendations before us.
Well, I think as local authority members, we have a duty to deal with these issues at our level anyway, and as the on the Transport Committee on the Tees Valley Combined Authority, certainly the issues about disability and so forth is something that we discuss. So we've got that knowledge when we come here, and I don't think there's any advantage in increasing the size of the board. I mean, today I'm struggling actually to have a seat where I can be seen by the chairman, you know, so if you have more people, it's going to be more difficult. So no, I don't support the recommendations either.
So in terms of having representatives from the trade unions on the board, I think it would be an extremely helpful move. I completely subscribe to the description of the social model of organisation. We work this model in Leeds very successfully, and we rely very heavily on our union colleagues, and we have very constructive relationships. And I have to say, I have to separate myself entirely from Don's comments. I don't think that was helpful in the slightest. And I have to say that the operators were equally vociferous about the problems that they have from Network Rail in being able to deliver their franchise, and there'd be no suggestion at all that Network Rail wouldn't be sitting around this table. I think we have to be clear that what the proposal is for the three trade union Congress representatives, the TUC representatives covering the north of England, to have a voice on the board. This is not individual unions who could have a closer relationship, possibly. But I've spoken to the Yorkshire rep, and he believes that it would be possible for them to come up with an arrangement where one of the three could be at a meeting, and they could work it very successfully between them, which I think would be a very practical way forward. But
this is what they would wish to do.
That's the view that he expressed to me, that they don't see the need for all three to attend every meeting either. We all have enough meetings to go to, but that they would then have a channel open. And members of trade unions not only work in the industry, they are more than anything as well users of the services and absolutely dependent on public transport to be able to do their business. And I just think their voice around this table would be very helpful indeed.
Sorry, I'd missed Richard's hand as I went round the table.
Chair.
Apologies.
I suppose, Chair, my history is one of trying to find solutions to problems. And we've talked at great length today about the problems with the train operating companies, and I think we've sent a very strong, firm signal to them that they've got to change their performance. They did raise an issue about the matter of 7-day working. I don't understand why we can have a 7-day-a-week NHS, a 7-day-a-week ambulance service, fire service, police service. We can't have a 7-day-a-week railway. I just don't get it, to be perfectly honest. And I think that anything we can do to move towards that has got to be a good thing. I don't see at the moment that this proposal will move us anywhere towards that. I've got to say I've got some sympathy with Judith's view that perhaps one trade union representative or TUC representative might be beneficial. Certainly I don't see 3. I do see increasing the diversity on the partnership board being as positive. I think the points raised about people with disabilities in particular has been an important issue. But the proposal as it stands, I can't support.
So we've always tried to operate by consensus ever since this board was created. And in fact, as chairman, I made a commitment to seek to operate by consensus. And we had a very full discussion of this item at the last meeting, and it was clear there was not consensus. There were strongly held views, but they were not all consistent with each other. To the extent I've played a role working with the 2 vice chairs and a representative of the LEPs between meetings, it was to try to find a compromise which listened to all wings of the board, in the hope that if I brought a proposal through the monitoring officer to you which reflected a wider set of inputs, we might be able to reach a consensus in that it was not what anybody had originally proposed, but everybody could at least acquiesce in. But it's quite clear to me from the discussion we've had, and I don't think there's a lot of point continuing that discussion because it will not heal that difference, that we still have a difference of view, even with the attempt to find a compromise in the middle. So we're at a little bit of an impasse on this. We can move to a vote for voting members of this board, if that is the wish of the board. Equally, I had absolutely nothing to do, for the avoidance of doubt, with the operation of the Scrutiny Committee. The Scrutiny Committee raised the question of a wider review of the Partnership Board, addressing a wider range of issues. I feel I have done my best as your chairman to come up with a compromise proposal, but I should record for accuracy that the Scrutiny Committee felt there were other questions that could be looked at. So we were asked to bring this report to this meeting, which we have done. I guess my question now is, would you like the executive to continue to look at options and hold discussions between interested members in order to try to reach an agreement, which is indeed what the Scrutiny Committee proposed, not me, or do you wish to move to a vote? Please, Steve, yes?
Can I provide just a point of clarification to what you had said? The 3 TU representatives would not necessarily all be at the same meeting, but they are regional. So if it was held in the North East, it'd be likely that the North West Regional TUC chair would attend that specific meeting. And then if it was in the North West, it'd be that one. So it would not be 3 in normal business meetings who would attend. And of course, they are non-voting members.
With that helpful input first from Judith and then from Steve, it appears that we have a proposal to add 4 members, 3 trade unionists to make sure 1 was here, a representative of the environmental activists, a representative of travelling public, and a representative of those who have access challenges to get on our services.
If I may, Chair, not quite right. I think the proposal is to add 6 members, not 4 members. But at any given meeting,
Exactly.
only 4 of those members would attend.
I was trying, Andy, to reflect the concerns of members who felt the board was getting very large, which indeed it is. I am conscious, Heather, that you've been on my blind side slightly, and I've struggled to bring you in as quickly as I would have wished to on a number of occasions. So that is correct, Andy. So I come back to, and first of all, let me just take in the spirit of openness and collegiality, let me just take a show of hands, and this is not a commitment because it's not a formal vote, of all members of the board, whether they're voting members or not. Can I have a show of hands on who believes we should move to a vote and conclude this matter now, as against those who believe, on the recommendation of the Scrutiny Committee, not my recommendation, because I'm not involved with the Scrutiny Committee, that this matter bears wider examination? I just think we should clear the decks on that first. So we'll do it on straight show of hands. Who thinks we should move to a vote? And who thinks that it should have more examination by officers in the Scrutiny Committee? So I think there's a majority of members looking around the room who would suggest we should move to a vote. Do people accept that that's an accurate reflection of the hands up? Okay. I'm conscious that the Let's put quite a lot of time and effort into thinking about this, and there was a particular proposal on their behalf by Peter Kennan that even if we extended the membership of the board, that we should not move to the partnership board, which is not a statutory board and not part of our formal governance structure, meeting in public. So I think, given the LEPs have made an effort to pursue that, we should have a vote on that first. So can I have, first of all, let's see on a show of hands basis, because then I'll know how much, whether we need a formal vote, Julie. The proposal in the paper was that the partnership board would meet in public. The proposal was made because the more it moves to a stakeholder group, the more the interests around the table would perhaps wish to meet in public. But the LEPs have made a strong and pertinent point. So can I have a show of hands on whether the partnership board should meet in public? Those in favour of the partnership board meeting in public? Those who think the partnership board should meet in private? Okay. So at the moment, the balance of view, unless you want a formal card vote, the balance of view was that we should just leave things as they are and it should continue as an advisory meeting in private. Okay? Let me then move to the issue of principle. So there is a proposal for 6 additional members, of whom in practice we will probably have 4 joining us for the partnership board sessions. I'll just take whether we are close to a consensus, and then quite properly we will have a formal vote if that is necessary. So can I just see hands up in favour of the proposal in the paper on membership? Okay, thank you. Hands up against? Okay, thank you. And hands up for abstention? Okay. Now, it is a change to the Constitution, and as a change to the Constitution, it requires the supermajority of 75%. So I think we do, with respect to those who have concerns about the proposal, I think the only thing I can do at this point is have a formal vote. Do colleagues accept that is an appropriate thing to do? Then, Julie, as monitoring officer, could you conduct a formal vote on the membership proposal?
Yes, Chairman, I'll just move to the other side of the room and my colleague will help me with the computer. So, Chairman, with your permission, what I propose to do is read out the name of each authority. The representative from that authority will then indicate whether they are for or against or abstain, and if we receive no reply to that, we will assume that the representative is not here and that therefore counts as an absence. So if members are happy with that, I'll commence with Greater Manchester Combined Authority. Thank you. West Yorkshire Combined Authority.
In favour of the proposal.
Thank you. North of Tyne Combined Authority. I think the representative may have left the meeting, Chairman, so we'll record that accordingly. North East Combined Authority.
For the proposal.
Thank you. Liverpool City Region Combined Authority. Thank you. Sheffield City Region Combined Authority. Thank you. Lancashire County Council. Thank you. Tees Valley Combined Authority.
Against.
Thank you. North Yorkshire County Council.
Against.
Thank you. Cumbria County Council.
For.
Thank you. Cheshire East Council.
Against.
Thank you. East Riding of Yorkshire. No representative chairman, so we'll mark that accordingly. Cheshire West and Chester. Thank you. Hull City. Thank you. Warrington. Thank you. City of York.
For.
Thank you. North Lincolnshire.
Against.
Thank you. North East Lincolnshire.
Against.
Thank you. Blackburn with Darwin. Thank you. And finally Blackpool. Excellent. Chairman,
while Julie is doing the constitutional calculations, we'll, with your agreement, proceed to the final item of the agenda, and then Julie can report back when that has been done. Julie, can I just check with you as monitoring officer, are you comfortable with the legality of how we've handled this item?
yes, Chairman.
Thank you very much. So we're going to have a very brief item while the votes are counted on TRU, but an emphasis on brevity, because we all have trains to catch.
Thanks, Chair. You've got the paper in front of you, so I will be very, very brief. This is obviously a very important project with investment allocated to the tune of around £3 billion for the north of England. It's something we have made statutory advice on as an authority, and we have returned to on a number of occasions at the board. Quite rightly, board members wanted to see how this was set in the strategy for the whole of the north of England as part of a coherent plan. I think the decision that was made earlier on around the Manchester corridor in terms of providing statutory advice on that is an important component of that overall strategy. Leeds Station will be another future key component of this, so that Transpennine route upgrade has a clear run at either end as well as in the main part of the scheme. We're approaching, or the Department for Transport is approaching key decision point on this in terms of taking it through the outline business case. As you will recall, TfN is not a co-client on this at this moment in time. The paper sets that out. We have made statutory advice, and we are working closely as a stakeholder on this project with the department. But because we're approaching that point, we felt it was appropriate to bring back some key challenges that we want to put to the department as they approach this key point, and they're set out in paragraph 3.8 in the paper, which is around seeing full delivery, sustainable freight strategy, for example. Future-proofing was a very important element you wanted to see in there. Supporting decarbonisation, so the extent of electrification, for example, and accessibility of stations are some of the elements in that paragraph 3.8. We're asking for you to endorse that as a set of challenges today, but we have got the Department for Transport in the form of Programme Manager Russ McMillan for Transpennine route upgrade. He's agreed with the Board's permission to say a few words from the Department's point of view in response to our paper, if that would be helpful.
Thank you, David. So, Russ Mullen, I'm Programme Director for Transpennine Route Upgrade in the DFT. If I can start by welcoming the engagement and interest that we had from TfN and the official team, which we intend to intensify over the coming months as we approach a decision point. Given the lack of time, it's probably worth restricting my comments to sort of three key areas. The first is that we've continued to progress the TRU programme at pace. That's not only in terms of maturing the design, but also doing some enabling work, particularly on some of the diversionary routes that can be required while we do the construction, and also launching the consultation around the Huddersfield-Ravensthorpe intervention, which is one of the major parts of the programme. As David mentioned, the next step in the process is to submit an outline business case in the next few months, which will seek approval for a specific package of work. And in doing that, will allow us to respond and engage with David and the wider team in terms of the set of challenges that have been put forward. And then I think the third point that's worth reflecting on is that we've done a lot of work, and I think you took a presentation at the last board on reducing the disruption that's going to be associated with the construction phase of this programme. That's not to say that disruption won't remain, and I think it's important to acknowledge that for a programme of this scale, there's clearly going to be a period of disruption as we construct it. Just on the analysis itself, I think it's important to point out, and this is how we will begin to address the challenges that David's put forward, that the analysis will look at the best value for money option, including end states which go beyond the funding that's currently available for the programme. So we're looking at the best outcome in an unconstrained sense before we then work back what's an approvable programme. That will look at things like more extensive electrification and also the electrification that is in the scheme as it stands. So I think we welcome the challenges that have been put forward. We've got effectively a 2 to 3 month package of activity as we evaluate the options as they exist. We've been working closely with David's team in the run-up to that process, and we'll continue to do so over the next couple of months. And that will give us a really good opportunity, I think, to engage on these challenges and effectively land on some decisions around those challenges when we get to the outline business case in the sort of March-April period. Thank you.
And just add, Chair, I think one of the key things is that you as board members are able to engage with the department's team as they work through that and dig down into some more of the detail with our assistants and look at the response that the department makes to our challenges, so that we and you can ensure that we get the right outcome for the North.
Okay, I don't think in the interest of time we've time for a lengthy debate on this issue, which we discussed it at great length at the last meeting, but it's a very helpful update. There are some particular proposals in the paper, but before I come to endorsing them, can I just take brief comments, please? Judith.
I might be misremembering, but I thought we had agreed that for all papers we would have a section on climate emergency implications in the paper, so that there was every single item that we bring to the board. So if we could see that from now on. I'm getting a lot of concern from passengers that there has been a slipping of the commitment that I believe also we made as a board in terms of making sure that every station on the route is fully accessible. That's why it would be so valuable to have representative from disability groups on this board. But I think it would be so regrettable if we don't take this opportunity to make sure that we, any major scheme like this, that we actually live up to our principles and make sure that that's included at every opportunity.
Concerns? Are people happy to endorse the proposals in 5.2?
So I just wanted to highlight, Judith, that one of those points is that we were asking that precisely that point on along the TRU corridor, all would be upgraded, made fully accessible.
I know we are, but we need to sort of police that, if you like, because that across the line, people are picking up a rowing back of commitment on that area. So I think I need to be reassured that it very much is at the top of that we're actually making sure it is actually implemented.
And there was a previous request from Greater Manchester that the stations that are part of TRU are being upgraded, but there are some on the route that are not being upgraded, and they missed out on previous funding, and therefore this is part of the reason why this request is here, to make sure that all the stations along the route are made fully accessible. So.
Chris, I don't know whether there's anything you wanted to say finally on this TRU proposal, or whether...
I'll leave it.
Thank you very much, and thank you for your attendance and input throughout the meeting. We appreciate it. Julie.
Yes, thank you, Chairman. We've now been able to look at the way that the votes are cast. Had all of the 20 authorities been present, there would have been a total of 86 weighted votes. The absence of the 3 authorities mean that the total is 78. Of those, 59 votes in the weighted votes were cast in favour, and that comes to a total of 75.6% of those present, which means that on the weighted part of the vote it is carried. Turning then to the 50% simple majority, of the 17 present, 11 voted in favour, the threshold was 9, and therefore the simple majority is met as well, which means that having regard to both aspects of the test, the proposal is carried. Thank you, Chairman.
Thank you, Julie and colleagues, for conducting that vote. So the proposal in B for a change to the membership of the Partnership Board has been carried. Not the easiest of issues for this board to deal with. I think it's unfortunate that we've had a clear difference of view where the only appropriate thing to do is to have a vote, and then that vote has to be honoured on the basis of its constitutional proprieties. But we have managed today to have a conversation whereby we have shared views fairly and openly. So thank you for that. Andy?
Just to echo that, I mean, occasions this board should take a clear decision, you know, not rather than fudge issues. So I don't think there's any issue. We're all used to having votes in our working lives, and I think it's sometimes something to do to get clean decision making. And at last we've won an election in the north, so at least give us that. Thank you.
Touche. Okay, I declare the meeting closed. Good journeys home.